So looking out my window at the green tree, now I'm thinking about the late summer feeling. So I looked at that feeling when summer arrives, that peak of midsummer, and then there's that dog days of summer, that heat wave feeling, the siesta of the year, that feeling of just being immobilized by the heat. And now as we're getting into the middle of August, now I'm getting the late summer feeling. This is the feeling where I start to feel like we're coming around the wheel once again. And there's just hints of what's coming. The hint, it starts to creep in at night. And it's just barely, hasn't quite happened yet here. But we can feel the first thing we can notice is the sun setting earlier and the sunrise later, for anybody who happens to be awake then. Just that little bit of darkness returning, just starting to creep back in. And then the nights start to get colder. That hasn't quite hit yet. We're still in the heat here. But the nights start to get a little bit colder, and we get that hint of the cold season starts to creep in late at night, even though the daytimes are still hot. And there's just that feeling that even though it's full summer, there's no way to see this as being not summer. But there's that hint of the end. And that's that feeling that I get in the late summer. And the feeling that it gives me is this feeling of I want to start something that goes through into Christmas. It's like this feeling of going into the fall. This is now time to get serious, get back to business after the summer break. Now I wonder if some of this comes from the season itself and just the effects of the weather and the seasons, and some of it is just from the traditions of where I live, when we go back to school in September, and the importance of Christmas. These things are not directly made by the weather, but just by the traditions of these parts of the calendar. But however we mix it, however our mix of the weather where we live, the traditions of the culture that we live in, and our own preferences and our own experiences of these seasons, we can get a feeling of the seasons that fits for each of us. And that's the feeling that I have from this time. That feeling that because the cold season is coming in, it's like I feel like it's time to get ready for the winter. Even though it's nothing like the winter, it's like we always see the seeds of the next season very early in the previous season. Even as we experience full heat and sun, there's just the seeds of the cold season there. So that's how I see this time. And I really like to look at this just to get that feeling of each of the different phases of the year. And I find that there's something about being connected to the calendar and really observing the pattern of the seasons that I find very satisfying. And I'm not sure exactly why. Somehow it feels like it's a way of connecting to something. It's a way of changing the way we see time so that we see it as almost like it's more of a circle instead of a line. We have this feeling of movement throughout the year where we are returning. Every time we pass through a season, I get the feelings that I had previously, all of the previous times I had that season. It feels like it's reconnecting to the past, and it happens in every season. Every season is kind of going back to something, but at the same time, it's also bringing in something new because it's a change, and no season that we have lasts. And so it's this combination of being something new, but also something repeating. And that's what we get from this wheel of the year. So the way I describe it, any of the details, they simply fit for my particular situation. So I'd be very curious to hear about anybody else, your view of this wheel of the year, your experience of these different seasons. Do you get that late summer feeling? Do you get the feeling of, what kind of flavor do you get in each of the different seasons? And so each of us can have our own way of imagining that circle of the year.